The project started with an open competition, an open architectural competition, and the client had a very clear picture of what the building materials should be, and it was suggested to use timber as much as possible. They had for the city a timber construction philosophy, and that should be used.
Yeah, and so timber was obviously preferred, as you said. So what were the reasoning behind it in this case?
The reasoning is for the commune was quite easy because they have a lot of forest. They have a lot of forest industry. There's, I think, outside the city is basically forest, as long as you can drive.
Yeah, and I remember reading somewhere that like a lot of the products were sourced from a close range to the actual projects, or within a certain radius. Is that true?
What I heard was that all the products for the building were basically contracted within a 200-kilometer radius of the project, and that I find a big achievement in today's contractual culture.
Yeah, it's super impressive. There's not many projects you can claim that. And you've used a lot of timber with other systems, so as a hybrid structure. Can you tell us a little bit about what you use for products and why you came up with some of the systems you used?
I mean, when we started the open competition, it was not necessarily a given that we would win it. That would basically be the exception. And so we liked the task, and we were very open-minded. We said, okay, and they want timber, let's try it. And we developed an approach that we hadn't used before, and that was to not think of timber as a limiting factor, or look at the properties of timber and from that start developing the project, but rather think of what should the project be? What is it we want to do? And then we're going to use timber anyway. And let's start with the possibilities. And then if we find problems, then we slightly adjust it to give us the experiences that we want. And that worked actually quite well. So basically we closed our eyes and went straight for it.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful project. So how tall is I think it's the hotel component. So maybe it's worth maybe taking a step back and, talk about the building from 50,000 foot level. Like what sort of mixed use is it? How big's the building? What's, stability system, the vertical system is used for the project?
What we found back then, I mean, this is 7 years ago. Back then we found that there was no other project where we would build a timber development in such a scale. In terms of modern program, complexity, it was supposed to be a theater scene. There was 2 smaller ones. There were a hotel complex, kitchens, a library, offices, workshops, all this combined in one city block, basically. We were building a whole city block with a complex program in timber. And that was definitely new for us, and we could not see any references for that. We developed, as I said, a little bit according to what we want to achieve, and we adjusted it slightly so it fits well to the timber material. The tower or the hotel part is definitely the highest part. And we wanted to try out to use CLT as the lateral stiffness system, not concrete, but CLT. We had positioned 2 shafts on the ends of this volume that worked structurally very well. and could convince the client to go for CLT instead of cross-bracing or the typical solution of a concrete core.
And it must be I don't know any other buildings in the world that are that tall using CLT as this lateral stability or shear walls. You know, a lot of people listening now probably understand that the timber itself can be quite stiff, but one of the challenges will be the connections, I'd imagine, back to the foundations when using CLT as shear walls. Were they big? Tell us about some of the connections for these shear walls with such big lateral loads.
Yeah, I think the discussion when we looked at the forces, there were two components basically. One is how to connect two shear panels in the corners and how to screw that together. We found that the shear forces were not necessarily so high, so it was reasonable to achieve. The next problem was to connect to the foundations. Obviously, in these cores, we can get tensile forces, and they would need to be anchored down to the basement. Timber can take tensile forces. That works very well in these kind of settings, but requires special connectors to make that happen. And we developed a system where we took a concrete system for the lower part and then adjusted it with a larger dowel system in the timber part. The tensile forces were not so large, so it was quite easy to achieve. We also did not have so high tensile forces high up. We chose very long CLT panels, so we would avoid to splice. The core is made out of 2 layers, and the layers could be staggered to transfer shear force, tensile forces.
Gotcha, that makes sense. So when you so with the core, did you design it like a big box, like you would a concrete building?
Yes.
So I guess the corner connections, is that you were talking about transferring the shear? And did you get exactly. A full? Did the core work like an entire box, like 100% working like a box, or was it a certain? Oh,
classical core design. What was special here was usually cores on the inside of buildings. Here we put it towards the outside, towards the ends, to increase the stiffness, the geometric stiffness in the cross section.
Yeah, wow. Because I know this is something, there's projects in Australia I've looked at, but maybe it's the wrong assumption that you can't design CLT like a core, so like a box section, because it's too hard to get the shear flow around. Maybe I'm getting too technical there, but it looks like you guys done it.
No, we did not have too big problems with that.
Yeah. Well, that's really good to hear. And another component when you're designing such tall timber buildings is how the building moves and the tolerances and fitting it together. Can you tell us a little bit about the building, movement in construction or in service, and how you allowed for that in the building?
And the big concern in these kind of buildings at the time were wind-induced vibrations. At this site, earthquake is not an issue. It's not a design case. So that was not necessary to consider. But we were obviously unsure about the dynamic behavior of the building. The analysis is similar to what we used for different higher buildings or similar high buildings in steel or in concrete, and we adapted the same methods to timber. The uncertainty was more related to the damping that could be achieved, because there were basically no references for these kind of dampings. We used very conservative values and got convincing results. That was probably the hardest part. And as you know, timber structures have a tendency to be light. And for wind-induced vibrations, you want to have mass and a heavy facade or a distributed weight on the facade to counteract those forces, in addition to high stiffness and damping. So it needs to be a good balance. And the timber structures obviously lack the weight.
Benefit and also, makes designing a challenge at times. So you were talking before about the horizontal system and movement. Was vertical movement also a consideration in this design? I mean, how much the building drops, and was this something that you focused on in the design?
The traditional way, let's say traditional, I mean, what usually is being done in CLT construction is that you build a wall, and on the wall you put a floor, and then you build the next wall for the next level, and again a floor. That means that the floor level is usually resting on the wall, and it gets forces perpendicular to the fiber direction. That uses, if the building gets higher, taller, this becomes a serious problem because you squish the floor slabs. And we have seen that in buildings here where this were several centimeters and problematic. So that was something that we tried to avoid. And basically, we have the shaft, we have the core, and then we connect the wall or the beams to it with different screw fastening systems. And that worked quite well. So this traditional thinking on top of each other doesn't work so well in these higher buildings.
Gotcha. So you've got so it's just the wall connects straight to the wall, and then you've got sort of the CLT sits on a beam on the side.
Yeah, and then the beam is connected with the shear connector to the core, or the panels right into the core. The other thing that we did, the hotel part is very repetitive. As you can imagine, hotels are the same. We developed a system where this could be done in modules, 13 levels tall, and these boxes, these alveolar boxes, they were put in between the cores, and then there was a lateral connection that would take the forces out to the cores.
Yeah, gotcha. So there's obviously a lot of learnings, because in this project, I mean, you've balanced high complexity and, as you said there, repetition to maximize simplicity. So I guess those two things can go together. And what were the keys in this project to making it so successful?
I believe it is a combination of excellent architecture, urbanistic organization of the building, a stunning design, and this was all done in timber, but the timber was not necessarily governing the design, nor was it the reason to build the house. So I think all aspects got very nicely balanced. And that, I believe, is the very strong side of this project, to show that timber and these kind of advanced timber buildings can be part of a mainstream construction, of a mainstream building that is a cultural house that has a high public standing, I would say.
Mm. And was there a high level of building information modeling and collaboration or collaborative modeling achieved on this project with the team?
Yes, this is customs here in Scandinavia, and that was back in 2015. So everybody was, I mean, we used BIM modeling for quite a while, and we know it a lot from the offshore industry. They have been using these kind of systems for decades almost. So when these more mainstream systems like Revit and Tekla came, we used them a lot in our designs before, and then it became more collaborative approach. We had to our steep learning curve due to the collaborative environment that we created, that we wanted to test out for that project together with the architects and the other designers. And but really nobody is I mean, this is just plain business.
Just normal for you guys.
Just normal,
yeah.
There's it's very common now here.
Yeah, well, it's common in I feel like it's common here in Australia, but there's different. I mean, for you, is there a lot of rebuilding the models, or you're working off the same model? And you mentioned you're using Tekla as a structural program. I mean, are you using the central model for your structural, or is there a lot of rebuilding, or is it a smooth process where there's not much wastage in, everyone building their individual models for their individual purposes?
Yeah, the biggest problem here is more when it goes towards the contractor.
Yeah,
because they have their own ways of doing things, and they want to do it differently, just to make it different. And this is a little bit a problem, as I still feel it with the BIM world. I see two issues with the BIM world, and that is, one, it prohibits a little bit conceptual thinking. So usually you try to put all your piping in this certain area, and then there's an agreement in the project that this is the case, this is how we do it. But the BIM modeling has more the tendency, okay, there's space, there's nothing there, then we put something in there. And that can generate quite complex technical systems, for example, where one looks into details, but without establishing a concept idea how things shall be organized. And so this is something that we learned and try to implement very early. So there's modeling stages, what do you focus on different levels of the project, and that makes it the transition process is much smoother. So today, to model a building in BIM doesn't really take a lot of time. It is the development of the building and the building systems that takes time, where you do several iterations. And I think it's getting better.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we've spoken a lot about this project, and there's been, a lot of elements of good design, obviously, from architecture and engineering. What are some of the challenges you overcome and the lessons learned in this project? I mean, if you were to do it all again, would you change anything?
I think it's a hard question, I must say, because I think the transition to the contractor, that was not necessarily easy. These are processes that we designers can't really steer. And what we would have done differently, not so much, actually, I must say. I think also when we look at the response that the project has received, there's always details you can do better, but there's no, we should have done this, or not really.
Yeah. Well, it is a beautiful project. So it's good to hear that. But on the contractor side of things, would it have been helpful to have the contractor on earlier? So, you know, an early contractor involvement on some sort of other, you know, fee arrangement, just to have that input at the start. So I guess it sounds like there was some maybe later changes that happened a bit later down the track that would have been perhaps necessary.
You know, there are different philosophies on how to build buildings. People have different relationships to risks, and they have different abilities to solve tasks. We are working in projects where we develop very far. We are working in projects where we work with the contractors very early, and they all have their challenges. There's a tendency here to move towards early contractor involvement, but what we also see there is that the contractors, they are not necessarily used to foresee a project. So the designing aspect, what does that mean? They actually start looking at things when they see a drawing or when it is on site. Then they can start thinking. But this abstract level of coordinating many aspects, architectural, engineering, contractual, and also execution, this is not always easy also for contractors. And to find this fine balance of how early shall a contractor be, how much involvement do you need early, it's very hard to define that in let's say good lessons learned. It depends very much from contractor to contractor. I would almost say you have good people to work with. It doesn't matter if they come in early or late, and you often don't know upfront. So we have had contractors that I remember one bridge project. It was amazing. I mean, basically the guys on the bridge working there, they started calculating the bridge just for fun, just because they found it so interesting. And they had a level of involvement and problem solving that made this amazing project happen. And so to my mind, it does not really matter what kind of contract system you have. There are always some advantages and disadvantages, but the people, if you find the right people with the right attitude, that makes it all happen.
Yeah, a similar question and a similar bit of a buzzword is also early supplier involvement. Do you have is it a similar comment you have on, you know, when should you engage suppliers and when should they be sitting around the table and, you know, if they've maybe got DFMA input, do you have, and it's always an interesting relationship with the engineer, with suppliers, because suppliers have got sometimes their own engineers as well. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, it again varies a lot from supplier to supplier. In an early phase, a client often wants to have a wide range of possibilities, want to see what they can do. Some have a tendency to jump right to a contractor because they can get, or they think they can get some security of financial and risk taking. My experience is also, I mean, getting older in this business and building up experience. A lot of these topics we have been through. I mean, we've been working with so many contractors. We know about where things are heading. And so I think this is not a black and white question. It is more, where are you in your career as a contractor or as an engineer or as an architect? We learn from each other. And this develops a different dynamic. And I think we should open up for this learning from each other as a as a means, instead of saying, okay, the contractor should be early involved or not. It is more about what kind of people do you get, how do they work together, what is the group dynamic, and what is respect, and so on. Anything can be solved. No.
Yeah, that's so good. And yeah, the group dynamic, and each project sometimes it's its own team dynamic and culture.
Yes.
And when it is open to learning, then, you know, because everyone's going to make mistakes sometime, and how easy it is to be open about it rather than, you know, hide from it.
Yes. That we have seen a lot working with other cultures. I mean, in Sweden, for example, or especially with Germany or Austria, it has been very problematic because they are used much more to a protective project style where you're not allowed to make a mistake. You can't make a mistake. And you would always much more discuss the mistakes you have done instead of finding solutions. And this is where I really enjoy working in Scandinavia, where there is, first of all, there's a lot about consensus. Things need to be understood by the group, which sometimes can be limiting, but usually it gives a much wider foundation. And this making mistakes, especially here in Norway, a good mistake is one that we have found, that we can solve, that we can address. And there is, if you start hiding information, or if you, that is seen as difficult.
Yeah. Well, it's been so good to be able to speak to you today, Florian. It's a phenomenal project that you've been a part of. If people want to find out more about yourself or the project, or is there anywhere you want to send the listeners to go and check out?
Yeah, we maintain a homepage, but you know, it is we basically don't have so much time because we're doing projects. So we don't, we sometimes publish a little bit, but it is usually the homepage, and where we just show a few projects. Right now it is being updated to a new software system, but yes. And I think what we would be interested in is just contact. There's an email address, and if there's anything, just contact us and have a little talk, and can be anything.